Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. 1:30 p.m., roughly 1:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, 4:30 p.m. here in Orlando, Florida. Welcome. Hi, Marilyn, Nancy, Rebecca, Sophie. Hi, Sophie, all the way from France. And Martha's watching. Hi, Martha. Long time no see. It's been a busy day here in Orlando. My real world job of producing for the Prairie program sometimes gets in the way of our little house readings. So I've trying to fit a lot in today. We're going to do 2 chapters this afternoon. The Tin Peddler and the Strange Dog. And I love these chapters because these chapters are sort of, other than going to church, are the first time that the outside world is coming to the Wilders at the farm. And so there's some interesting characters that flow into the life of the family, and how the Wilders choose to handle those people, to bring them in, deal with them, bargain with them for the services that they provide or the services they offer, are an interesting character revealing part of who the Wilders are. So really fun. So if we're all here, let's get started. So here is the cover page of the chapter, Tin Peddler. One evening after sunset, Almanzo saw a white horse pulling a large, bright red cart up the road, and he yelled, "The Tin Peddler's coming! The Tin Peddler's coming!" Alice ran out of the hen house with her apron full of eggs. Mother and Eliza Jane came to the kitchen door. Royal popped out of the pump house, and the young horses put their heads through the windows of their stalls and whinnied to the big white horse. Nick Brown, the Tin Peddler, was a jolly fat man who told stories and sang songs. In the springtime, he went driving along all the country roads, bringing news from far and near. His cart was like a little house, swinging on stout leather straps between 4 high wheels. It had a door on either side, and from its rear a platform slanted upward like a bird's tail, held in place by straps that went to the cart's top. There was a fancy railing all around the top of the cart and the platform and the wheels were all painted bright red with beautiful scrolls painted bright yellow. High in the front rode Nick Brown on a red seat above the rump of a sturdy white horse. Here's a picture of Nick Brown's wagon and his sturdy white horse. Almanzo and Allison Royal and even Eliza Jane were waiting when the cart stopped by the kitchen porch, and Mother was smiling in the doorway. "How do you do, Mr. Brown?" she called. "Put up your horse and come right in. Supper's almost ready." And Father called from the barn, "Drive into the buggy house, Nick. There's plenty of room." Almanzo unhitched the sleek, big horse and led him to water and put him in a stall and gave him a double feed of oats and plenty of hay. Mr. Brown carefully curry-combed and brushed him and rubbed him down with clean cloths. He was a good horseman. After that, he looked at all the stock and gave his opinion of it. He admired Star and Bright and praised Father's colts. "You ought to get a good price for those coming 4-year-olds, he said to Father. "Over by Saranac, the New York buyers are looking for driving horses. One of them paid $200 apiece last week for a team, not a mite better than these." Almanzo could not speak while grown-ups were talking, of course, but he could listen. and he didn't miss anything that Mr. Brown said. And he knew that the best time of all was coming after supper. Nick Brown could tell more funny stories and sing more songs than any other man. He said so himself, and it was true. "Yes, sir," he said, "I'll back myself, not alone against any man, but against any crowd of men. I'll tell story for story and sing song for song, as long as you'll bring men up against me, and when they're all done, I'll tell the last story and sing the last song." Father knew this was true. He had heard Nick Brown do it in Mr. Case's store in Malone. So after supper, they all settled down by the heater, and Mr. Brown began. It was after 9 o'clock before anyone went to bed, and Almanzo's sides ached with laughing. Next morning after breakfast, Mr. Brown hitched the white horse to the cart and drove it up to the kitchen porch, and he opened the red doors. Inside the cart was everything ever made of tin. On shelves along the walls were nests of bright tin pails and pans and basins, pie pans, bread pans, and dish pans. Overhead dangled cups and dippers, skimmers and strainers, steamers, colanders, and graters. There were tin horns, tin whistles, toy tin dishes, and patty pans. There were all kinds of little animals made of tin and brightly painted. Mr. Brown had made all these himself in the wintertime, and every piece was made of good, thick tin, well made and solidly soldered. Mother brought the big rag bags from the attic and emptied them on the porch, all the rags that she had saved during the last year. Mr. Brown examined the good, clean rags of wool and linen, while Mother looked at the shiny tinware, and they began to trade. For a long time, they talked and argued. Shining tinware and piles of rags were all over the porch. For every pile of rags that Nick Brown added to the big pile, Mother asked more tinware than he wanted to trade her. They were both having a good time, joking and laughing and trading. And at last Mr. Brown said, "Well, ma'am, I'll trade you the milk pans and pails, the colander and the skimmer, and the 3 baking pans, but not the dish pan, and that's my final offer." "Very well, Mr. Brown," Mother said unexpectedly. She had got exactly what she wanted. Almanzo knew she did not need the dishpan. She had it set out only to bargain with. Mr. Brown knew that too. Now, he looked surprised, and he looked respectfully at Mother. Mother was a good, shrewd trader. She had bested Mr. Brown. But he was satisfied too, because he had gotten plenty of good rags for his tinware. He gathered up the rags and tied them into a bale and heaved the bale onto the slanting platform behind his cart. The platform and the railing around the top of the cart were made to hold the rags he took in trade. Then Mr. Brown rubbed his hands together and looked around smiling. "Well now," he said, "I wonder what these young folks would like." He gave Eliza Jane 6 diamond-shaped patty pans to bake little cakes in, and he gave Alice 6 heart-shaped ones, and he gave Almanzo a tin horn painted red. They all said, "Thank you, Mr. Brown." Then Mr. Brown climbed to his high seat and took up the reins. The big white horse stepped out eagerly, well-fed and brushed and rested. The red cart went past the house and lurched into the road, and Mr. Brown began to whistle. Mother had her tinware for that year, and Almanzo had his loud squawking horn, and Nick Brown rode whistling away between the green trees and the fields until he came again next spring. They would remember his news and laugh at his jokes, and behind the horses in the field, Almanzo would whistle the songs he had sung. This now is The Strange Dog. I think this is for Laura, and her writing. I think this upcoming chapter is fascinating because we know that Laura writes so, it's not a perfect world, but there's a kind of idyllic quality to the world that Laura writes about. There's a symmetry to it that's beautiful. Here, in this particular chapter, Laura introduces something a little different, something of a darker side of human nature. It all works out okay in the end, but in my estimation, it's a little different. Now, Laura aficionados may have a very different feeling about this. They may say, no, this is very consistent with the way Laura writes. And I'd be curious if people commented on that. But this strikes me as a little different. And you'll see now as I read The Strange Dog. Nick Brown had said that New York horse buyers were in the neighborhood, so every night Father gave the 4-year-old colts a special, careful grooming. The 4-year-olds were already perfectly broken, and Almanzo wanted so much to help groom them that Father let him, but he was allowed to go into their stalls only when Father was there. Carefully, Almanzo curry-combed and brushed their shining brown sides and their smooth round haunches and slender legs. Then he rubbed them down with clean cloths. He combed and braided their black manes and their long black tails. With a little brush, he oiled their curved hooves till they shone black as mother's polished stone. He was careful never to move suddenly and startle them. He talked to them while he worked in a gentle, low voice. The colts... That was a little phone call that I wasn't expecting. Sorry, the world is stepping in on me, you see. Let's see if they call back, and I may have to take it. But let me keep going here. I'm going to pick up with the colts nibbled his sleeve with their lips and nuzzled at his pockets for the apples he brought them. They arched their necks when he rubbed their velvety noses, and their soft eyes shone. Almanzo knew that in the whole world there was nothing more beautiful, so fascinating, as beautiful horses. When he thought that it would be years and years before he could have a little colt to teach and take care of, he could hardly bear it. One evening, the horse buyer came riding into the barnyard. He was a strange-looking buyer. Father had never seen him before. He was dressed in city clothes of machine-made cloth, and he tapped his shining tall boots with a little red whip. His black eyes were close to his thin nose. His black beard was trimmed to a point, and the ends of his mustache were waxed and twisted. He looked very strange, standing in the barnyard and thoughtfully twisting one end of his mustache into a sharper point. Father led out the colts. They were perfectly matched Morgans, exactly the same size, exactly the same shape, the same bright brown all over with the same white stars on their foreheads. They arched their necks and picked up their feet daintily. 4 years old in May, sound in wind and limb, not a blemish on them, Father said. Broken to drive double or single, they're high-spirited, full of ginger, and gentle as kittens. A lady can drive them. Almanzo listened. He was excited, but he remembered carefully everything that Father and the horse buyer said. Someday, he would be trading horses himself. The buyer felt the colts' legs. He opened their mouths and looked at their teeth. Father had nothing to fear from that. He had told the truth about the colt's age. When the buyer stood back and watched, while Father took each colt on a long rope and made it walk, trot, and gallop in a circle around him. That's called lunging. You're lunging the horse when it's going around in a circle. Look at that action, Father said. The shining black manes and tails rippled in the air. Brown lights flowed over their smooth bodies, and their delicate feet seemed hardly to touch the ground. Round and round they went like a tune. The buyer looked. He tried to find fault, but he couldn't. The colts stood still, and Father waited. Finally, the buyer offered $175 apiece. Father said he couldn't take less than $225. Almanzo knew he said that because he wanted $200. Nick Brown had told him that horse buyers were paying that much. Then Father hitched both colts to the buggy. He and the buyer climbed in, and away they went down the road. The colts' heads were high, their noses stretched out. Their manes and tails blew in the wind of their speed, and their flashing legs moved all together as though the colts were one colt. The buggy was gone, out of sight, in a minute. Almanzo knew he must go on with the chores. He went into the barn and took the pitchfork. Then he put it down and came out to watch for the colts' return. When they came back, Father and the buyer had not agreed on a price. Father tugged at his beard and the buyer twisted his mustache. The buyer talked about the expense of taking the colts to New York and how about the low prices there. He had to think of his profit. The best he could offer was $175. Father said, I'll split the difference. $200, that's my last price. The buyer thought and answered, I don't see my way clear to pay that. All right, Father said, no hard feelings, and we'll be glad to have you stay to supper. He began to unhitch the colts. The buyer said, over by Saranac, they're selling better horses than these for $175. Father didn't answer. He unhitched the colts and led them toward their stalls. And then the buyer said, all right, 200 it is. I'll lose money by it, but here you are. He took a fat wallet out of his pocket and gave Father $200 to bind the bargain. Bring him to town tomorrow and get the rest. The colts were sold at Father's price. The buyer would not stay to supper. He rode away, and Father took the money to Mother in the kitchen. Mother exclaimed, you mean to say we must keep all that money in the house overnight? Well, it's too late to take it to the bank, Father said. We're safe enough. Nobody but us knows the money's here. I declare I shan't sleep a wink. The Lord will take care of us, Father said. Well, the Lord helps them that help themselves, Mother replied. I wish to goodness that money was safe in the bank. It was already past chore time, and Almanzo had to hurry to the barn with the milk pails. If cows are not milked at exactly the same time, night and morning, they will not give so much milk. Then there were the mangers and stalls to clean and all the stock to feed. It was almost 8 o'clock before everything was done, and Mother was keeping supper warm. Supper time was not as cheerful as usual. There was a dark, heavy feeling about that money. Mother had hidden it in the pantry, and then she'd hidden it in the linen closet. After supper, she began setting the sponge for tomorrow's baking and worrying again about the money. Her hands flew. The bread sponge made little plopping sounds under her spoon, and she was saying, it don't seem as though anybody'd think to look between sheets in that closet, but I declare, what's that? They all jumped. They held their breaths and listened. Something or somebody is prowling round this house, Mother breathed. All you could see when you looked at the windows was blackness outside. Pshaw, 'twain't anything, Father said. I tell you, I heard something. I didn't, Father said. Royal, Mother said, you go look. Royal opened the kitchen door and peered into the dark. After a minute, he said, it's nothing but a stray dog. Here they are, looking out the door, and you can see the little figure of the stray dog on the porch. "Drive it away," said Mother. Royal went out and drove it away. Almanzo wished he had a dog. But a little dog digs up the garden and chases hens and sucks eggs, and a big dog may kill sheep. Mother always said there was enough stock enough on the place without a dirty dog. She set away the bread sponge. Almanzo washed his feet. He had to wash his feet every night. When he went barefoot, he was washing them when they all heard a stealthy sound on the back porch. Mother's eyes were big. Royal said, "It's only that dog." He opened the door. At first they saw nothing, and Mother's eyes got bigger. Then they saw a big, thin dog cringing away in the shadows. His ribs showed under his fur. "Oh, Mother, that poor dog," Alice cried. "Please, Mother, can't I give him just a little bit to eat?" "Goodness, child, yes," Mother said. "You can drive him away in the morning, Royal." Alice set out a pan of food for the dog. He dared not come near it while the door was open, but when Almanzo shut the door, they heard him chewing. Mother tried the door twice to make sure it was locked. The dark came into the kitchen when they left it with the candles, and the dark looked in through the dining room windows. Mother locked both dining room doors, and she went into the parlor and tried the parlor door, though it was always kept locked. Almanzo lay in bed a long time, listening and staring at the dark. But at last he fell asleep, and he did not know what happened in the night till Mother told it the next morning. She had put the money under Father's socks in the bureau drawer. But after she went to bed, she got up again and put it under her pillow. She did not think she would sleep at all, but she must have, because in the night, something woke her. She sat bolt upright in the bed. Father was sound asleep. The moon was shining, and she could see the lilac bush in the yard. Everything was still. The clock struck 11. Then Mother's blood ran cold. She heard a low, savage growl. She got out of bed and went to the window. The strange dog stood underneath it, bristling and showing his teeth. He acted as though somebody was in the woodlot. Mother stood listening and looking. It was dark under the trees, and she could not see anyone, but the dog growled savagely at the darkness. Mother watched. She heard the clock strike midnight. And after a long time, it struck 1 o'clock. The dog walked up and down by the picket fence, growling. At last he lay down, but he kept his head up and his ears pricked, listening. Mother went softly back to bed. At dawn, the dog was gone. They looked for him, but they could not find him anywhere, but his tracks were in the yard. And on the other side of the fence, in the woodlot, Father found the tracks of 2 men's boots. He hitched up at once before breakfast and tied the colts behind the buggy and drove to Malone. He put the $200 in the bank. He delivered the colts to the horse buyer and got the other $200 and put that in the bank too. When he came back, he told Mother, "You were right. We came near being robbed last night." A farmer near Malone had sold a team the week before and kept the money in his house. And that night, robbers broke into his house while he was asleep. They tied up his wife and children, and they beat him almost to death to make him tell where the money was hidden. They took the money and got away. The sheriff was looking for them. "I wouldn't be surprised if that horse buyer had a hand in it," Father said. "Who else knew we had money in the house?" "But it couldn't be proved. I made inquiry. and he was at the hotel in Malone last night. Mother said she would always believe that Providence had sent the strange dog to watch over them. Almanzo thought perhaps he stayed because Alice fed him. Maybe he was sent to try us, Mother said. Maybe the Lord was merciful to us because we were merciful to him. They never saw the strange dog again. Perhaps he was a poor lost dog, and the food that Alice gave him made him strong enough to find his way home again. And that's the end of The Strange Dog. The chapter surprises me because Laura writes about a house being broken into, and a man being tied up and beaten to near death by robbers. It's interesting. It's provocative. It's unexpected. And of course, that's what makes it so powerful, because when something bad happens in Laura's world, it's really bad. And it gets your attention. And she's not afraid of it. That's the thing that is so interesting about her writing. Because people for years have written off Laura as being, sugar-coated and everything's idyllic and perfect and wonderful. But events like this in this book show that everything wasn't always idyllic and perfect. And when we read, if Allison lets me, read The Long Winter, which is a great book if you haven't read that. Allison, I'd love to read The Long Winter, by the way. We can talk about that. But The Long Winter is dark too. And this is dark. And there are other moments in the books, but they come as a surprise. And they paint a fuller, richer picture of the life Laura, and in this case, Almanzo and his family lived, growing up in a very different time than our own. But those little moments show that the time isn't so different from our own. These things happen. They happen. We don't like them. They're not happy things, but they happen. And they happen to them and they happen to us. And that's part of the universal appeal of the books. That's story time for today. And I look forward to being with you again tomorrow and read 2 more chapters. What are they called? Sheep shearing. Oh, fun. And let's see, and what's the next one after that? Sheep shearing is a long one. And cold snap. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Wash your hands. Stay close together. Be good to each other. And I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.